Okay, so in this video I want to kind of go over a distinction that was given by Bertrand Russell in an article called Knowledge by Acquaintance and Knowledge by Description, or maybe it's the other way around. I'm sorry I don't have the actual paper article with me. It's on my iPad, which is what I'm using to film this with. So that's a somewhat of a fundamental distinction that it did have a lot of influence on the epistemology that followed. So I guess I want to sort of dive into getting into what knowledge by acquaintance is and what knowledge by description is, and sort of hit on some key points that he wrote in that paper. So, can we know about so and so without knowing what so and so is? It's like if we know something by it being described, then we can know about it, but we don't know exactly what it is. So it's kind of along the lines of what it's gonna sort of show. What do we know when the subject is merely described? When we merely have description, when we have merely knowledge by description, what are we knowing, and do we have a adequate kind of knowledge about the subject in question? I'm acquainted with X when I have a direct cognitive relation with it, and I am directly aware of it. A acquaintance is, not the whole knowledge by acquaintance. Russell kind of favors the knowledge by acquaintance, and then as time progresses into the sort of the logical positivist period, knowledge by acquaintance was sort of looked at as no longer a adequate concept or a adequate way of looking at knowledge, because people like Morch, like in Rural Carnap, they ask questions like, well, if we are acquainted with something, what is it that we are acquainted with? And the same thing with the whole thing about the given or sense data. Is there a giver and a givee? So that's kind of, people like Schlick and Carnap kind of did away with looking at knowing something as being acquainted with it. But at this period, I think that this is a really nice article because it kind of shows the difference and what kind of knowledge you want for a consistent theory of knowledge. So if a person S is acquainted with a subject O is presented directly to S. And the word acquaintance is sort of also directly related to presentation. If you are acquainted with something, it has been presented to you at some point or another. And this kind of gets down to sense data. Now, sense data is something that G.E. Moore and Bertrand Russell have brought up a lot, and that kind of had a central part in the logical positivist period. And then we had kind of sort of a logical positivist quest towards having a ultimate foundation for our knowledge, that being sense data or observational statements about that sense data or protocol statements about that sense data. And then the whole quest, people like Schlick and Carnap, was to build all of knowledge on the foundation of sense data, or of the statements that are about sense data, i.e. observation statements or protocol statements. And that kind of failed. It didn't fail. It slowly went out of style, and it didn't work all that well. They couldn't entirely do that as well as they had thought. And then you have people like in the 50s and 60s like Quine come along and point epistemology in a different direction. So now that I've basically given you a history of a cursory history of epistemology from the 1910-ish to 1960. We can kind of go back to this what Russell was saying. I just kind of felt the need to introduce that, even though I have it a billion other videos. But what is sense data? Sense data is data about what we see, or like Russell and G.E. Moore have used the word patch to describe sense data. For instance, you with this bottle, for instance, you have patches of blue and white and brown of a certain size and shape, and that is kind of what that is, and also data about what you can smell, a roughness or smoothness of how you're feeling something, or tasting something, stuff like that. But and then statements about that was kind of the quest for that was kind of what they wanted to do. They wanted to build all of knowledge on that foundation. Acquaintance is awareness of particulars, and a particular, of course, is a particular object. And we're talking like, we have, say there are some people who ontologically commit to universals and some who don't. But we have a concrete object of a bottle, a certain specific concrete object of a bottle. And this is a particular object in that certain other more possibly abstract things like brownness, smoothness, roundness, blueness, whiteness, kind of, given the Platonic, Platonist metaphysical way of doing it, they kind of instantiate on this thing. But either way, in metaphysics, there's various, theories of between particulars and properties and all this different stuff, and but a particular is a particular thing, a concrete individual. Acquaintances, awareness of such particulars, and also awareness of universals, and that is also involves that is conceiving or being aware of a concept. And a universal, can there are lots of different things about what a universal is too. A description is the so and so or the so and do. Definite descriptions, a so and do, a singular. There are definite and there are indefinite descriptions. And if we have knowledge of a certain particular individual or a certain abstract thing, then we have descriptions of that. If we have descriptive knowledge, descriptive knowledge is a vague mass of historical knowledge. So let's see here. And I guess one thing I want to sort of think about here is this one fundamental epistemological principle that Russell does give. Every proposition which we can understand must be composed wholly of constituents with which we are acquainted. That is how we can have knowledge of something. Descriptive knowledge, he's kind of arguing against the validity or usefulness of descriptive knowledge, because you don't always know. If you have a description of something, you don't always have an idea of what is being described or what you are describing or what you're talking about. If a proposition which we can understand must be composed wholly of constituents with which we are acquainted, in order to possibly have knowledge about those things, or have knowledge given a belief, or have a belief about that. And when we are supposing or judging, thus we are forming a belief, acquaintance is a necessary thing. We cannot form suppositions or judgments or beliefs without having acquaintance of that which we are supposing or judging or believing about. That's mostly what he does here. Is he kind of tries to shift the idea of knowledge away from the knowledge that is descriptive, and kind of argues against the usefulness for descriptive knowledge. So that's kind of a cursory look over of that article. I think I highly recommend reading that article. But if you have any questions, comment below, and